I just want to talk about an interesting observation that I've had when I reviewed my debate notes, in hopes of covering a potential oversight, when I was preparing for the private Discord debate that I thought I would have with Face and LMS when I reached out to him in April of 2023. Think about how the Blackpill started out and evolved. Face started out by making a case for lookism with his wall videos, proving that looks matter, showed what makes a face attractive and what women prefer in dating. This is the lookism thesis, the first developmental stage that the Blackpill took in its natural progression as a philosophy. Moving on to the second stage, Face later expanded on his first thesis and provided more evidence for the lookism dynamic and halo effect, showing how different men get treated based on their looks in the form of videos, articles, and social media posts. Face also cited the 80-20 OkCupid data, and the 28% sexlessness graph which has since been updated. Others brought up economic and demographic reasons as explanations for the dating woes. This is the socio-sexual dynamics, the second developmental stage of the Blackpill. Lastly, there is the third segment which, unlike the first two, hasn't been beaten like a dead horse. It's the who's dating who. The who's dating who, being the final segment of the Blackpill that would entail the outcomes, is the final step in closing the circle. I think that the best way to go about covering this topic is through a debate or at least an exercise in dialectics. This would also cover the recent trends and developments with the increase in AMWF pairings. The recent developments in the AMWF dynamic are relevant to the topic of who's dating who. What we have so far is some individuals imploring others to go outside and look at the couples to see the most common type of pairing as a means to test the predictive power of the initially postulated premises, insofar as answering the question what is the most prevalent type of pairing in couples, or what is the majority case when it comes to who's dating who. There are also Blackpillers who believe that Chads are hogging most women. Face and LMS said that Chads monopolize most of the dating markets, and Wheat Waffles said women are getting monopolized by the top 10% of Chads. He really thinks this is a good argument when there's an even less logistical possibility of that dynamic playing out empirically. The original claim that the top 20% of men are monopolizing 80% of women already doesn't add up logically and mathematically. It gets even less likely with the notion that the top 10% of Chads, who are already rare to begin with, would maximally accommodate 80% of women. 3 segments. After identifying the 3 constituent parts of the Blackpill philosophy based on its stages of development and its progression as a philosophy, I think it's reasonable to say that there are 3 segments of the Blackpill. First, lookism thesis. This talks about the first axiom of the Blackpill, the fact that looks matter. This is when Face built a case for lookism with his wall videos. Second, socio-sexual dynamics. This explains the dynamics that take place because of lookism, demographics, industrialization and other sociological factors. This is when First in BP 2021 brought up additional data, graphs, stats, studies, and charts to add to the full picture. Third, who's dating who, the final segment that tests out the predictive power of the initial thesis. It shows how the initial theses play out in reality. This lets us infer from observable reality to see whether or not the claims they posit about the dating market do bear out in reality. Face didn't have the monopoly on building on the 3 segments. Other people have also contributed to making a case for each segment. For the lookism thesis, recently, newer people argued that there's a point of delineation between male versus female gaze. In 2020, a second look focused on examining and critiquing looks theory and its evolutionary explanations for what drives human attraction. For the socio-sexual dynamics, First discussed demographics on his channel, and BP 2021 explained industrialization's downstream consequences using the demographic transition model. For the who's dating who, Face and Waffles put forward their piss-poor arguments, but there's me and others, who could provide a more accurate and reasonable stance on this topic. It doesn't matter if they put forth the idea that looks matter, or that women have been empowered on its own, or that there's hardship in dating today, if their initial theses aren't reflected in that who's dating who, or if the conclusion that they render in the final segment doesn't logically follow the premises or isn't a necessary inference from them, their whole argument is a non sequitur. Syllogism test. Regarding the observation I've had, it's the fact that the 3 segments of the Blackpill actually look like a syllogism. Not only do they look like proper syllogistic elements, I also think they could be treated the same. This is supported by Face's admission during the stream where he debated Viva Fluff, and she said that Face and 80-20 proponents believe that women date Chads, and they support it with 1. 80-20 OkCupid data which is grossly outdated as fuck, and 2. Data set on Tinder swipes showing women get way more matches than men. Face agreed with her that those 2 are the main corroborating points for proving the 80-20 or Chad monopolization claim. If the Chad monopoly or 80-20 rule is the claim, and they support it with OkCupid data which states that looks matter, and dataset on Tinder swipes which shows women's sexual market value, it actually makes sense to treat the notion that looks matter, which is the crux of 80-20 OkCupid data, as major premise, and women's SMV, which is the crux of dataset on Tinder swipes, as the minor premise, with the Chad monopoly claim being the conclusion, and all three neatly fit in Lucas' thesis, sociosexual dynamics and who's dating who respectively. If we look at the three segments as being akin to syllogism, I don't think that anybody would disagree that the first segment of the black pill is the major point, the minor point being the dating dynamics, and the conclusion who's dating who, serving as a demonstration of the initial theses. To be considered a strong argument, a syllogism must pass both the validity and soundness tests. Validity refers to the structural correctness of an argument. In a valid syllogism, if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true based on the logically correct form of the argument where the conclusion follows from the premises. But the validity of the argument does not necessarily mean that the conclusion is true, as the premises themselves may not be true. Soundness requires that the syllogism is valid and that the premises are true and accurate. A sound syllogism is one where the premises are true and the argument is valid, ensuring that the conclusion is also true. Now, what are the narratives that the black pillars espoused regarding each of the three segments, and how would their theses fare when put to a syllogism test? Major point, Lucas' thesis. Women prefer Chads. Looks matter. Minor point, sociosexual dynamics. Women have access to Chads on social media and dating apps. Argument, who's dating who? Chads monopolize most of the dating market. Speaking of the major point, looks matter. Once a concession is made that looks matter, the question becomes how much and for what? And it's at this point where it segues into the fact that when black pillars talk about the importance of looks, they're making a case for online dating by and large, especially when they say that looks are about 80% of the equation. On Tinder and other dating apps, looks are going to matter way more because people only have looks to go off of, and it's a hookup app which heavily focuses on looks and the looks threshold would be way higher. But in real life, women have more things to go off of, like how socially adjusted you are and how many friends you have and other factors that play a difference, such as major histocompatibility complex, which is conveyed through scent. Of course, some black pillars would say the politically correct thing, which is we're not saying looks are literally everything, but on different accounts say looks are so important that if you don't pass the looks threshold, you won't get to showcase your other traits. And considering their past claims about how most men are invisible, women prefer Chads, it's pretty telling that they think you need to be at least Chad or Chade light. They play both sides of the fence when convenient. It allows them to backpedal when challenged, while still espousing an extreme and reductive lookist perspective. The point of delineation between short-term and long-term dating has to be made when having this discussion to delineate the scope and application of how looks matter in different contexts. For long-term dating, you don't have to be Chad, but there is a minimum looks threshold you need to meet, and it sure as hell doesn't have to be a supermodel. The go outside and look around heuristic shows that most couples tends to be more or less looks matched. If you're a keen, honest and unbiased observer, you know this. Otherwise, we'd only see really attractive people dating and reproducing, which only the most deluded and demented black pillars who resort to conspiracy theories believe. So when they say that it's about 80% of the equation, they're really only talking about short-term dating instead of dating as a whole. So their idea about the extent of how much looks matter in dating can't be posed as a blanket statement for the aggregate or majority case. Speaking of the minor point, women no longer need to settle for their looks match because they have access to Chads on social media and dating apps, suggesting that dating apps would serve as a medium for the Chad monopoly to play out. How can this be if the graph from Statista.com shows that only 7% of women use Tinder in the United States, and Bumble shows only 6%? The same roughly 10% figure could be seen for other dating apps. Regarding the idea that the Chad monopoly would play out via social media, since Face's claim is that Chads monopolize most of the dating market, it seems like he is invoking the idea that between men and women, men are the instigators and the more proactive party. So, we should see Face put forth some evidence that Chads are spending most of their waking moment treating it like their part-time job, pursuing women en masse like a thirsty simp, and they maintain that effort long-term. The conclusion, Chad monopoly, is stuck at being a claim that has yet to be demonstrated. They have yet to meet their burden of proof to demonstrate that the 80-20 rule or Chad monopolization claim plays out empirically. If you can't provide an exhibit to prove your claim, it might as well be inadmissible. Going back to the results of the syllogism test, the conclusion isn't a necessary inference from the premises, and premises are also false. Even if we grant that the premises are true, Face's arguments would still fail the syllogism test due to his conclusion being a claim and a non sequitur. It's stuck at being a claim. Face has yet to meet his burden of proof to provide sufficient evidence to demonstrate the truth of his claim. The conclusion does not follow from the premises. Face focusing solely on women's perspective and not accounting for the role of the Chads themselves, like when he says women prefer Chads and women have access to Chads on social media and dating apps, begs the question because both premises have the snuck-in premise that it's a one-sided dynamic where the onus is on women to facilitate the monopoly because they are the subject in both premises. as if chads have no say in this matter. This contradicts the essence of the 80-20 rule or chad monopoly, which invokes the notion that between men and women, men are the instigators and the proactive party. Hence the implication of the chad monopoly where chads would carry out this operation. It would make sense if in both premises where women are the subject, chads would also be included, which if granted, it would look like this. Premise 1. Looks matter and women have tunnel vision for chads and chads are attracted to average women. Premise 2. Women have access to chads on social media and dating apps. Most women as well as chads use dating apps and chads pursue most women on both social media and dating apps like it's his part-time job and he sustains this effort long-term. Conclusion. Chads monopolize the dating market, but even in this charitable steel manning and interpretation of their position, where you balance it out by including both chads and women in each premise, both of those premises are just claims. Where is the evidence that chads are attracted to beckies and where is the evidence that most women are on dating apps and chads constantly pursue them on both dating apps and social media? I don't think Face, Wheat Waffles or any Blackpiller would posit each premise on their own in proving their chad monopoly. It's the concert of both premises that could get them close to having an argument for their chad monopoly claim. They can't just say looks matter therefore chads are hogging most women. Even then, each of the premises are false and the conclusion is just a claim. It's their claim. So they have the burden of proof to demonstrate it, which they've never done. Based on the syllogism test, the chad monopoly claim doesn't follow from the premises. It's a non sequitur. The funny thing about all this is that it's pretty telling that the reason why Face has to resort to hedging his stances with vague words like can. Like when he says women can access chads online, instead of straight up making an assertion that chads are dating most women, is because deep down he knows he can't prove that idea. He needs to hide behind plausible deniability by using rhetoric which lets him avoid fully committing to making clear and falsifiable assertions because he knows it would backfire on him. He and his successor Waffles are just too sensitive and insecure to handle being corrected or acknowledging that they were wrong. I don't think they would stop at just saying that the 80-20 rule is just about what women ideally prefer in a vacuum. They would also say that it's so profound that not only does it talk about the most prevalent dating dynamic that plays out, for both short-term or long-term, where chads are hoarding most women in both hookups and relationships, as well as women's preference for a small subset of men, and it shows that majority of men are incels. From what I've seen, that's how they would justify it in their purview. When they realize how wrong they are with their unfounded claim, would they double down on their monopoly idea, or would they change their stance and omit one of their long-standing notions and strongest explanations for the dating woes men have today?